And thanks so much for joining us. And thank you for especially it being a very nice day for our standards here in the Pacific Northwest. Pretty good spring day. I will introduce Claudia and then we'll get underway so we can get you back out there. So excited to have Councilmember Balducci, who first was elected to the County Council in 2016. In 2020, she was elected chair of the King County Council. She also chairs the Sound Transit System Expansion Committee, serves as president of the Puget Sound Regional Council, and co-chairs the county's Affordable Housing Committee, which is seeking to unite the region around bold action to address the housing affordability crisis. In her role on Sound Transit, the Center of Support, she was instrumental in averting big delays to transit projects after pandemic disruptions and escalating cost-stretched budgets. Before serving on the County Council, Balducci was mayor of Bellevue and served on the Bellevue City Council starting in 2004. She's a graduate of the Columbia University School of Law, worked as a labor negotiator, and on her council page, she notes that she first became active in civic life when she joined her neighbors to advocate for the revitalization of her local shopping center in the Lake Hills community of Bellevue. So she's been active in all the forms of government pretty much, and just is all around town. So we're really excited to get her unique perspective and talk to someone who's really influencing policy on a lot of different levels. But in honor of Affordable Housing Week, I thought, well, wait, before I get ahead of myself, would you like to introduce yourself and your work a little bit before we get into Q&A?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. We did this once before, not that long ago, but it must have been pre-COVID because we were all in person, and it was such a great event. I'm really pleased to be invited back. It's nice to see you. Nice to see you all. Just a few words of opening, if I could. I really appreciate the work that the Urbanist does because it's sort of vision driven. We have a vision of, in my view, the way my words, probably not your words, actually making good on the promise of growth management. The promise of growth management was that we would have denser, compact communities where people didn't have to be reliant on a car. And honestly, if you start building with those blocks, you can get to equitable communities, more environmentally sustainable communities. It kind of unlocks the whole puzzle box of problems that we're struggling with so much now. So I really appreciate this group and the work that you do. Yeah, my name is Claudia Balducci. I'm the council member for District 6 in King County. That is Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond, Mercer Island area. And yeah, I wanted to say a little bit about what I'd love to talk to you about tonight. I'd love to talk about regionalism. I see council members on here from Bellevue. Hi, Janice. And the Port of Seattle. She also works there by day. Because I have kind of toiled in the fields of regionalism for a really long time. Long before I served on the King County Council, I worked for King County. I started there as a labor analyst, which is the line level in labor relations. And just earlier this year, I got to sign my own 20-year service certificate, which was pretty cool. I had to be the chair of the council to sign my 20-year service certificate. But in all those years, what I have observed is you need a lot of things to make the region work. You need good laws, right? And so let me just use this as an example because I know we'll talk about housing tonight. We were all disappointed the missing middle housing bill didn't go last year, right? Earlier this year. But let's suppose it did. Even if you get those kinds of laws passed, you still need the regional council to pass the right policies. You still need the cities to implement, everything flows down. And when you don't get that really solid state or federal, you must do this region guidance, then you get what we're doing right now. And that is, we are trying to come up with affordability goals for comprehensive plans. Now, sort of bear with me for a minute, because comprehensive planning, not that sexy, not that exciting. I think some of you might have been at the talk I gave at the kickoff for Affordable Housing Week yesterday. And I'm working on a chant, and it's not quite going because it goes something like this. It goes like, hey, hey, ho, ho. Comprehensive planning for affordable housing affordability is the way to go. It's just like, it doesn't work, but it is the way to go. So what we're trying to do now is take those job targets that are in everybody's comprehensive plans by law. You have to have job targets, and the housing targets that you have to have by law, but they don't got to meet up in any way. You can have jobs that pay from minimum wage all the way up to, you know, Bill Gates or whomever, Satya Nadella, all in my district, right? But your housing starts here. It starts at $1 million for a median home, or, you know, $2,600 a month. So this results in the kind of challenges that we're all struggling with, where people have to drive really far to get to housing they can afford, causing traffic problems, you know, impacting people's lives and their ability to succeed and their access to education and, you know, opportunity and all of that. So what we're trying to do now is get housing affordability goals into comprehensive planning. So you have to, we now by state law, so there's the law that says you have to plan to accommodate for all levels of housing affordability. We're trying to get that to be actual targets that the cities will accept, because we have to agree to these together, put in our comprehensive plans, and then build land use planning and ultimately zoning and code around making sure you have got enough land, zoning, and other policies for that affordability. Truthfully, it's all kind of like happening in rooms that don't get a lot of publicity and nobody's really going to see it. But if we do the right thing this year and next year and the year after, it will be the turning of the big boat where you start to see a difference. And 10 years from now, when our housing market is looking better, you will be able to source back to now that we did the right thing now. So it's like, it's super wonky. It's not very gratifying. It does not get people out in the streets waving placards, but it's actually how you start to really solve the housing crisis. So there's a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about, but if you want to dive right into Q&A, let's do it.
That works for me, and I was glad to be on that panel too. It is Affordable Housing Week, which is a week when I don't know if it's recognized beyond Seattle, but definitely in Seattle, the county or the council passes a resolution, and the Housing Development Consortium does a bunch of events, and other folks do events. And I'm gonna get to a question that we've kind of follow up on from that panel. But first, I just wanted to get kind of your general take on what the county's strategy is to get more affordable housing. You kind of mentioned some of the comprehensive planning, but I know you're on the Affordable Housing Task Force. Has identified there's about 250,000 homes we're short by 2040 in order to really, solve this affordable housing crisis.
Yeah, so a large part of our effort this year is going into the comprehensive planning policies, which is that work I just talked about, to create affordability targets for the first time, which will then spread out into everybody's planning, all 39 cities and unincorporated King County. So that would be a pretty big sea change. As part of that, we're trying to come up with accountability, which is something we haven't had before. So for example, in our previous countywide planning policies, we did have targets. We had countywide affordability targets. Is X percentage of the housing market should be affordable to 50% of area median income, Y percent to 50 to 80%, et cetera, et cetera. We had a chart, but it applied to the entire county. And that means that no jurisdiction was responsible for their share of it. And if nobody's doing each little piece, it never adds up to the whole. There was no accountability mechanism whatsoever. So the first thing we're talking about is accountability mechanisms. Who has oversight? Because there's nothing in the law that says that anybody has oversight. Unlike transportation planning and the Puget Sound Regional Council, there's no oversight for the housing. So we're about to, by agreement, try to come up with some accountability metrics. We also, thanks to the Affordable Housing Task Force, which was an initiative of mine some years ago when I first got on the council, we didn't used to do a lot of housing work at King County, but we've now hired a number of staff. We have a whole little section on housing, and one of their big accomplishments that I love is a dashboard where they actually track some really great data around what's going on with the housing market and by individual jurisdiction. At some point, when I get a minute, I'll put the link into the chat if I can. But it was actually very cool. I was speaking to a group of grad students up at the University of Washington, and they were doing Q&A, and one of them said, there's this really great dashboard I found. You should do something like that. I'm like, that's mine. That's my dashboard. So I think that this kind of like, and so we only have responsibility at King County, like for land use over the unincorporated areas. So there's some really detailed community work that's going on, thanks to Councilmember Zahalai, who I understand that you've spoken to, and Councilmember McDermott, who pulled together community groups to talk about affordability within like Skyway and some very specific areas. But once you get outside into the unincorporated areas, we're trying to limit growth out there. So really what we play is a regional role. We support, we fund, we have a number of funding sources that come through King County. One of the big ones is the hotel motel tax. A big chunk of that comes to us and goes to affordable housing projects. And I think the last thing I'll say is, and this isn't King County, but something I'm super proud of is, again, that process where you talk about the law starts something, but then you have to implement it. So Frank Chop passed a bill that said that Sound Transit needed to use some of its surplus land for affordable housing. It's very detailed. We call it the 80-80-80 bill. And under that, we developed a whole housing program. We are now at Sound Transit spinning off, when we're done with a chunk of land, we used it for construction siting or something, and we don't need it anymore. We put it out to RFP, and we have made some deals with developers that are building hundreds of units of affordable housing in multiple locations right near light rail, which is a really fabulous sort of combination of things. So that's some of what's going on.
And to kind of daylight some of the conversation we had, and I think folks can go back if they're interested in really digging into comprehensive planning and listen to that whole talk from the HGC. But I wanted to ask because you answered that question very interestingly. I asked, what happens in cities where, they just don't want to cooperate with some of these new requirements from House Bill 1220 and generally just the comp plan, asking them.
I tried to point at FutureWise.
Yeah, you tried. Well, you said you were going to punt, but then you actually didn't punt. It was a fake punt.
It was a fake punt.
You kind of said, well, the grants that the PSRC and others dole out are actually very important to these local jurisdictions. So that kind of being one of the few sticks that the region has for cities that are just going to pull up the drawbridges and not really do any housing. And just to pick an example, totally at random, not working on an article, one of our writers right now.
Okay.
Mercer Island, I think, has built about 350 multifamily units in over a decade. And they were under a island-wide residential moratorium for a little while. And now the part right next to the light rail station is still in a moratorium, and there's some complex reasons for them, but one of them just seems to be a hesitancy to build anything. So kind of go into like, and you said also that they can be sued under the Growth Management Control Board, but are these cities, you think, going to be deterred by that? And how do we just kind of get everyone rowing in the same direction?
Yeah.
Hopefully not coming to that type of drastic measure.
Yeah, so I would, it's something that I'll say to this group that I wouldn't say yesterday. I was talking, there were many more city people in yesterday's meeting, and I know that this is being recorded and it's very, very public, but I will say, because you're advocates, one thing I think that we need to do is kind of pick our battles, right? Like, there are definitely enforcement mechanisms that can be used. They're mainly through the hearings board, the growth hearings board, and the courts. But how much energy as an advocacy group do you want to put into forcing a lot more housing on Mercer Island? I would rather pick on Janus and Bellevue. I mean, because you can just get so much more production there. And there's a centers focus that they have. There's multiple light rail stations that you can center a lot of growth around. So I'm not saying we should let anybody skate on their responsibility to do their part. But I'm saying that when it comes to picking and choosing where you put your limited energy and time and effort, I want to work with Bellevue, Seattle, Sammamish. We were talking about Sammamish just earlier today. Sammamish is one of the bigger cities in suburban King County, and they absolutely have had some challenges accepting the level of growth and development that they ought to. But there's been a lot of work out there to make sure that that they will. So we didn't accept their housing targets at the regional body where we decide such things, and actually sent them back. That was pretty unique. I've never seen anything like that before, and I think Sammamish actually felt a little picked on, but maybe you'll see more of that. The region coming together to say, you're not doing enough. We're gonna kick this back to you. Now, the ultimate, like your question was framed yesterday as what can force jurisdiction to do things. We haven't gotten all the way down to the forcing end of the road with people, but persuasion works eventually. Not being eligible for grants is a really big deal to a city. All cities have got a roads capital plan. They've got a capital plan for their sewers and their water. And if they can't compete for some of the significant grants that are out there to do those things, they're going to be in some kind of trouble. So that's not nothing. And by the way, also, the mayor has said some things in Mercer Island about how he feels about growth and how much growth the city can accommodate. Let's let them work through their process and come to an actual decision. Like that's, I think I've certainly been guilty of popping off and saying some things I wish I hadn't said. And I think the most important thing we have to look at is what they do.
Yes, that makes sense. You definitely got to pick your
in their
battles
defense,
sometimes.
they are right there.
And I guess pivoting a little bit to sound transit, and it is very connected, especially when you brought up that excellent equitable transit-oriented development program that Sound Transit runs. But one thing you were instrumental, as I mentioned in the intro, is when we went through this realignment process during the pandemic, when a lot of these towns got really pressured, and some of them are, I mean, they're still delayed, but there was talk of really kicking the timelines, and you came in with a proposal that largely kept them on track with a couple of years of planning delay that was sort of inevitable with the pandemic. But do you think that, I mean, that strategy was contingent on sort of doing some cost control measures and revenue raising to make it all kind of add up? I mean, it's kind of early to tell, but do you think that is going in the good direction? Are we going to be able to kind of live the best case scenario of that legislation you passed?
Yeah, no. No, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but costs just keep going up. I mean, even since we did the realignment, the escalation in costs has been kind of remarkable. Now, that said, this is a short-term turn in a long-term program, so I don't want to be too doom and gloom, but things have definitely not broken our way in terms of, because the trade-off we were looking at, the three legs of any big project, as Janice, my friend, will tell you, is scope, schedule, and budget, right? So if you hold the scope constant, we don't want to shrink the projects that we promised to build, then your trade-offs are all about budget and time. Don't have enough money, take more time, in very gross terms. Want to go faster, need more money, or at least need more cash flow. And so right now the time and the money are not actually trending super great. And a lot of this is stuff just beyond our control. The time challenge was the concrete drivers strike. While I totally deeply support the workers in wanting to get a better shake from the companies, it did impact the time of some of our key milestones on some of our projects, and costs are heading in the wrong direction. However, one of the things, and again, I'm sort of a wonky planner type person, and I apologize for that. Like I said, it's not super fun sometimes, but I insisted that we do things like put in realignment that we were going to pull together a group of experts who would look at the way we do things and try to give us some innovative ways to speed up. And we're just pulling that group together now. It's going to have people who have done major projects nationally and internationally. We're going to build on some of the findings of the ENO study and report that was a group out of, Blake will help me here if I get it wrong, somewhere back east. And they did a deep dive into why certain capital projects like Sound Transit move faster in other parts of the country and mostly other parts of the world. Like the continent does much better than we do. And so they had some good ideas. So, we just keep pushing at it, just keep pushing at the rock, seeing to come up with ways, small and large, that we can move projects faster. Because, I was on the campaign trail when we were passing ST3, and I heard over and over and over again, I mean, over and over again. But I'll be dead. But my baby will be in college. But like people doing the life thing, like what will happen between now and 2040 something when all these lines open up. And so I just feel really deeply in my heart that I committed to all of those people that I would do everything I could to speed it up. And then, of course, life happens and we're actually not even meeting those timelines. So I just remain committed to trying everything I can from where I sit on the board to find ways to improve our process, to streamline, and it takes support from the community, because frankly, a lot of what ends up slowing us down are community concerns and desires, right? Community wants something different than what they're getting. They want a tunnel, they want a gondola, they want, or they really are rightly concerned about some impacts, and our natural reaction as a government is to slow down, do more public process, do more study. And so that's well-intentioned, but it has the long-term impact of delaying delivery of really important public benefits. So that's just my pitch for you all, to keep leaning on us to go faster, because we need to hear from the people who value the service dates just as much as they value, the construction impacts.
And recently, we got some bad news about Eastlink likely being delayed into 2024, although we couldn't get Sound Transit to quite confirm what had sort of been an internal document to Seattle Times got their hands on. They're still kind of pointing towards a June update, as far as we know, and our reporting staff. And some of that seemed related, like you mentioned the country strike, but there was also some construction defects that Seattle Times noted. And
we wouldn't have been subject to the concrete driver strike if there hadn't been rework needed, because it was done, right? And the fact that we needed rework was what got us stuck in that problem. Yeah.
So there's sort of a confluence of factors.
Yeah.
Do are you working on the same information? And if you have thoughts about, theoretically, the more we do these lines, the better we're going to get each time. Maybe Eastlink is still maybe third time's the charm, but do you feel like confidence in how some of these projects are being done? Some, mistakes happen, but do you feel, that the processes are in place to sort of roll with the punches?
I do. I've been around the board and the capital committee / system expansion committee for long enough that, we spend a lot of time focusing on the places where things go wrong. And without the pandemic and the concrete delivery strike, those were like three compounding big factors. We would have had plenty of float to make up for workmanship problems like we saw. But with those confluence of factors, it ate up all the float. And to answer the other piece is, we are really doing a risk assessment. The agency is, to see how long they think the delay is going to be, and they have explicitly not finished that yet. And that's the answer I'm getting, is they really want the space to look through everything in detail before they commit to another date, which is understandable. You don't want to commit to the second date and then have that fall off. And what I like to point out to them is, if you go down to Main Street, just outside of Bellevue where the station is, the tunnel entrance has got the year 2023 carved in the concrete. It's pressed in concrete, so they have to deliver in 2023. They're not allowed to go beyond that because it's written in stone.
Yeah, maybe they'll be able to shore it up and meet that promise.
Or else I'll have to go get some more concrete and fix it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the concrete will be flowing it when they're trying to do that. So you feel pretty confident about their ability to, as a construction, agency. The other part of it that obviously we hear a lot about it, a lot of people who follow the Urbanists obviously are frequent transit users, is, the other part of it is the service quality to the actual transit riders. And there's a lot of issues. And some of those were related to the handoff of the downtown transit tunnel from Metro to Sound Transit now. And those are particularly where the escalators and elevators have been malfunctioning. But there's some even in the newer sections and towards North Lincoln and all over the line. Do you feel confident in the agency's sort of how that's progressing as far as addressing those issues and what can be done to sort of make sure riders are getting the highest quality service they deserve.
So I think some people here know this, but let me just say I'm a regular transit rider myself, although not a regular light rail rider yet, because it doesn't come to where I travel around yet. And so I feel the pain. I feel the pain of, you know, unreliable service or broken down escalators or elevators. I mean, it's just, it just adds a lot of complexity to a trip. And if you think about people who are really transit dependent or who may have mobility disabilities, you know, it can be actually make it impossible for them. And so I do care about this stuff a lot. I'll be really honest with you. I'm a little stymied and stumped about what we call the vertical conveyances. The first set of plans to try to fix them had to do with two sets of issues. One was underbuilt conveyances that weren't robust enough for the conditions and therefore needed to be upgraded. And the other one was very, very old conveyances in the bus tunnel, the transit tunnel downtown. But as you pointed out, now we've got brand new ones that were built to a higher standard and those are breaking down too. And so that just right now, I see that there are persistent problems, a lot of focus on those problems, and yet not a lot of lasting solutions. So I don't have a promise for you here as to how we fix it. I just know that we need to keep at it until we figure it out, because other places run escalators better than we do, and we just got to figure it out. So let me ask, can I just go to the chat for a second?
Sure.
Because it's on point. Why aren't the new stations going to be shallower? Shallow stations don't need escalators. So let me point out that some of the planned new stations are going to be a whole lot deeper. Shallow is not the way we're going. We've got stations that are going to be much further underground. And what I'm mainly fighting for is that we have stations that are shallow enough to make sure that escalators are enough. I don't want more Beacon Hill stations with just elevators. Now, Beacon Hill is kind of a special case. It's a big, steep hill that you had to go through. We don't have to do that in downtown Seattle. We don't have to go deep underground. And the way our conveyances do tend to break down, I'm not real comfortable with the idea of stations in very busy parts of the system that are going to be, you know, disgorging passengers, lots and lots of them every few minutes, into a place where they might have to be waiting for elevators. That just doesn't seem like great service, and the time transfer penalty is not, it's not great. So I love your idea. I would love to have more shallow stations or even surface stations if we could figure out the, you know, the interactions on the street. But that's unfortunately not looking like what's on the menu. We're gonna get there.
Yeah, and I know you're one of the, you know, regular transit riders on the board, and it, you know, to be frank, it doesn't seem like everyone is, and there has been some pushback, you know, as far as returning to in-person work. And I know we all kind of feel that, like, sometimes it's nice to be able to work from home, but I was curious if you care to you know, further comment. I know it kind of came up with the recent Central Transit board meeting about, you know, you know, returning to the board meeting in person, what your kind of position is on that, and B, just in general, if board members should be, you know, if not required, strongly encouraged to go out and regularly use the service that they are making hugely impactful decisions on, you know, every week. Yeah,
I'll take the second part of that first. I think there's no substitute for riding the system, and it would be great if people went out and rode it occasionally just to check it out and to sort of inspect. But it's even better if you ride it as just part of your regular transportation. If you're going to do this work and put all this time in, knowing what works and doesn't work for your customers is just sort of super important to me. I'm going to just take a moment and say, a few years ago, I decided to start riding my bicycle more. I just needed to get out. I'm sitting in, you know, I've been sitting in chairs in offices for decades now, and I just wanted to get out more. So I decided to use my bike for transportation. I started using bikes and buses because I can't bike as far as I need to go. And that has been an absolute revelation about what works and doesn't work in our systems in so many ways. But but it really got me to think about the system because I used a lot of different buses that way. I used to just use my bus to go, to work and back, but with a bike, the half a mile walk shed becomes a 2, 3, 4, 5 mile walk shed, which opens up a lot of different pathways and destinations. And so I got gotten to know the system a lot better, just 2 years before COVID or so, and now during COVID. And I just would recommend this to everybody who has to be involved in transit policy. There's no substitute for knowing how it all works and the power of it. And frankly, I think this shows up in the boardroom when we get into debates about things like, is the system safe? Is it safe to ride the system? If you're on it all the time, I can say with a lot of confidence, it is safe to ride the system. There are some locations, some routes, some times where there are problems, absolutely. And our operators are correctly reporting a rise in drug use on the buses and a rise in what we would call non-destinational riders because people have nowhere else to go. They're hanging out on buses. Those are real things that we really have to do something about. But the idea that we would have a boardroom conversation where some people on the board were suggesting that the entire system is just rife with crime and blight and nobody should ever ride it again it's crazy to me. Like we're doing this for a reason. These systems have benefits and you don't even see them if you don't ride it. So there, you gave me that was my hit it out of the park. Thank you for that question. What was the first part that was harder?
If you care to comment about if you think the Sound Transit Board should be meeting in person.
Oh yeah.
If not for any other reason, then getting those folks to hop on a Sound Transit Express bus and come down to downtown Seattle and sort of experience that.
Yeah, I don't feel like we should need to haul people in from all ends of the system for board meetings all the time. I think if they're able to participate better, like you heard Board Member Franklin, who's the mayor of Everett, say that it can be a 2-hour trip for her, and that's one way. And we all serve on a committee or two, some of us, and the board. So if you could do some of those things remotely, I think it would make it easier for people to participate and spend time giving the issues that we face the time and the mental energy they deserve. I think yes, it would be nice if people rode the system. I don't know that we need to haul them into the boardroom in order to make them do that. Sure. I would really rather people show up prepared and refreshed and ready to have good conversations. We're a regional body. We have to make decisions about a regional system. And we debated long before COVID, we debated the idea that some members could walk 3 blocks down the street and be at all of the meetings, and other members had to take these long rides. And there's a kind of an unfairness there. And so we had talked about occasionally having meetings in Pierce County or Snohomish County. We never amounted to anything. I think remote is a good compromise for some of those meetings.
It is a huge district. And my next question is going to be about buses. And I saw that Mahad had a question in the chat, so I'll kind of piggyback and use his kind of question. He said, how can you provide immigrants and refugees who came to this country for the first time with safe and equitable access to transit? Since he lives in South King County, there's a Sound Transit bus that goes to Bellevue, but it's not very frequent. And the wait up to 60 minutes on sometimes. And is there a solution to bring faster transit to that corridor? And I think that kind of goes to several different parts of the Sound Transit taxing district where they're not really in the light rail plans, and there is some express bus service sometimes, but how do you kind of tie everything into a cohesive network and make sure everyone has at least adequate access?
Yeah, I'm gonna just abuse the privilege here for a quick second and go back to the last question because I can't help seeing the chat go by. And Kimberly brought up a really good point that I forgot to mention, and that is remote meetings have absolutely been a boon for public engagement in our meetings. At the county council, we get so many more people testifying, and their testimony is so on point. Like everybody who shows up has got a real issue. We don't have the, I won't say the name because it'll set Joe off. We don't have the folks who do it for fun and for, a living. and yet folks, so people have much more access. They don't have to come all the way down to talk to us. So that's another reason why remote or at least hybrid options are really good. But in answer to your question about, yeah, there was a lot packed in there. So I come from an Italian-American family of New Yorkers who all immigrated and, back around the turn of the previous century and got around and became Americans, learned the language, got education and jobs, and took the subway and the L train and the buses everywhere to do it, right? So like when you say, like, there's probably only funny to our family story about my grandfather as a teenager who didn't speak any English at all, getting on a train and missed his stop and started screaming, voglio scendere, which means I want to get off, right? And so anyway, this is like, it's close to my heart to make sure that we are providing this kind of access to people who are, maybe more used to having different options and who certainly need them. So the Metro Connects plan, Metro's long range transit plan, has got some things in it that help with the sort of situation you're talking about. And then this is not to your specific routes, to the question or specific routes, but the idea that we will make a system that is a true network. It's a web of connections, not a point to point, lots of buses that you can get on, have a 1-seat ride, get off the other side. It's like a bunch of taxi routes all strung together. Yeah. I've had to really fight this fight in my district because people love those 1-seat rides. Like I used to get out my door, hop on the 212, and it basically dropped me off at my office. But if you do that, it's a very hard system to make work for everybody. It's expensive. You end up with a very commute heavy system. So you're not getting those all day trips or shift work that people rely on who don't necessarily have 9-to-5 office jobs. So Metro Connects is a plan to create a lot more connections. It means that there's more reliance on nodes. So you're not going to get on a bus and get off at your destination, but you're going to get on maybe one right here that runs hopefully much more quickly is the plan. Like no more than every 30 minutes, preferably every 15 minutes, you get that bus that gets you into the light rail or a very frequent connection like a rapid ride bus. And from there, you're in the system and the system can take you wherever you want to go. So it all connects. And if we do more of that, you get to a place where everybody has got access to a fast, frequent, reliable system. I mean, not everybody, but where our goal is with Metro Connect is I think 75% of people in King County will be within a half a mile of a connection into that fast, frequent, reliable system. That's the dream. One of the things I want to say to you all here is we're still in this odd coming out of COVID period. There's a lot of uncertainty, sort of like our plans have been kind of thrown off and we're still trying to adapt to what the new reality looks like. But assuming, and I am assuming that we go back to essentially the plan that we have, it's not funded. We're going to need to go back to the voters and ask for more funding for the bus network to make it more frequent, more reliable, going more places the way you're talking about. Right before COVID hit, we had been working on trying to go to the ballot at the same time as Seattle did with their last measure to sort of merge the regional system and give it a real infusion of funding. And I mean, the last meeting I had with Rob Gannon before he left as Metro director was sitting in my office, just the two of us sort of hoisting a soda and being depressed because our ballot measure wasn't going to go. So my best guess is 2024, maybe, but we'll be working up to that. And we're going to need people who are advocates who want and need this service and understand the benefit of it to come out when that time comes and to tell us what you want and need. Yeah.
Great. You anticipated where I was headed with that, which is, a countywide measure. So 2024, we'll have that to potentially look forward to and rally around as advocates.
Yep.
And I guess
well, I'm not making news here. That's just a project. That is a projection on my part.
Well, the presidential year kind of makes some sense.
Yeah.
And I know part of the sort of tension at the county council has been between, do we go hard on electrifying the system first or on service? Kind of a big question, but if you care to add any detail to that as far as how you think you kind of balance those needs.
I think you would have loved our last plan, the plan that didn't launch. It had three major components to it, and they were not roughly equal, but they were all three of them pretty significant. And the investments were going to be in service enhancements, growth towards the Metro Connect's vision, electrification to get us to that earlier electrification date that we've now set as a goal for ourselves. I think it's 2035, and fare relief, so that we could bring fares down for, so the Orca lift, maybe expand that to more higher levels of income. And, we talked about things like free youth fares, which of course now the state has given us some incentive to do, which I'm really looking forward to working on. But yeah, so I think those were sort of where we landed as the three keys to the next big measure. We wanted, more accessibility via fare relief, electrification to continue our, walking the talk on climate with our own system. And then of course, a lot more service. But we'll be going back to the drawing board when we build a new proposal, because we'll need to go through public engagement, see where we're at, what the needs and interests are at that time.
And hopefully the battery and electric bus technology keeps advancing and becoming more cost competitive and everything.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Relatedly, and it's sort of dancing around the climate question, which I know you've been very vocal about, and one of the venues you've been vocal about is at the PSRC, the Puget Sound Regional Council, and they're dealing with the regional transportation plan update, and you've noted that, hey, why don't we actually align this with our climate goals, and you propose some changes. How does that going? Do you think they've kind of incorporated that in well enough, and is it an adequate plan as far as that goes now?
Yeah, so just by way of background, for folks who may not be deep into PSRC, which one of my friends likes to call the secret government, this is we are required by our federal funders and state funders to have a regional transportation plan that goes out a certain amount of time. Our current plan plans out to 2040. We're now doing the update that will take that to 2050. This is a requirement of significant federal funding that comes through PSRC. It's about $300 million a year. So there's real stakes here. And this plan builds on a regional growth plan that we adopted 2 years ago that has climate goals. Hooray, climate goals. It says that we will meet the 90% below 1990 GHG emission levels by 2050. But that plan also set a 2030 goal because we knew that we need to move at a certain pace because the pace of climate change is becoming quickly irreversible. And so it's meant to be on kind of a straight line where by 2030, we'll be at 50% below those levels. So 50% below 90 levels by 2030, 90% below 1990 levels by 2050. And then comes the transportation plan, and you would expect to see pretty robust actions and plans needed to meet those goals. But Blake is reminding me it's 80% by 2020. Thank you. I'm terrible at quoting numbers, but there was no such thing. And unlike 10 years ago when we did this plan, there was, all right, I'm misspeaking all over the place, so just don't quote any of my numbers, please. But there was no, we didn't model the plan. 10 years ago, we modeled it to see whether various options for what might be included in it met our climate goals. And this time we didn't. So we don't know whether we're going to meet that 2030 goal or not. And in fact, because most of the actions in the plan to combat climate change are things like a very hefty road usage charge is going to be, a very hefty road usage charge going to be adopted by the state. The fleet system, all of the fleet, your cars, my car, everything will basically be electrified. None of those two things are probably not going to be in effect much in advance of 2030, if at all. So it didn't look like a plan that met 2030 goals. And so some of us started raising our hands and saying, what are we doing here? We set this goal and now we're just promptly going to write a plan that busts right through it. Where we ended up was with some transparency. And I wish that we could absolutely have set ourselves a goal and said, we're going to live to it, and then not funded projects or plan for projects that would bust that cap. But PSRC wasn't ready to go there, so we put in transparency. We are going to model this plan by the end of the year, and we are going to be transparent about whether, probably how much, if the plan comes to life, how much we will blow through our carbon emission goals. And then every time we take a vote on a funding package to put that big pile of money towards transportation projects, we're going to get a report that tells us how much GHG we're paying for. And so we're going to know what we're doing before we do it. This is a step. It's just a step to have this level of knowledge. We also have to now start moving to the next step. And in my view, that is about, we have to look for how we plan to reduce vehicle miles traveled. You need to electrify and you need to reduce vehicle miles traveled in your system, or else you just don't meet the kinds of aggressive, carbon goals that we have. So I also put in there and got passed an amendment to immediately start talking about how do we do a better job of planning next year. We update our plans every few years, not a big, and so we're going to do some baseline work. We're going to have knowledge of what we're doing and be transparent with the public and ourselves about it. And then we're going to work on planning to find a way to make the plan fit within our carbon goals, which it probably does not currently. So we made steps and we're pointing in a better direction, but it's going to be incumbent on us to be really persistent and keep at it.
You mentioned your disappointment, the failure to pass the missing middle bill. I can't remember if you also mentioned House Bill 1099, but I'm sure you were a fan of that as well, which for folks who don't recall, that was part of the Washington Can't Wait package to reform the Growth Management Act to require local jurisdictions, including the counties, to incorporate the climate action goals. And the earlier draft included the vehicle miles traveled goals as well. There's some talk of some jurisdictions kind of taking on 1099 type goals on a voluntary basis, since it crashed and burned on the last day of our short session. What are your thoughts on that? Is King County looking into that? And I know you kind of just talked about a big way to kind of bring part of that into action, but I know the county is sort of operating at a different level from the Puget Sound Regional Board. You have a lot of different hats to manage here.
Yeah, it's true. Yes. So a number of us have been talking. The sponsor of that bill was Bothell City Council member Davina Dorr, who's also a state rep. And so she was coming from a position of, knowing how cities plan and what they need to do, and was really pushing to make sure that climate became, a key part of our comprehensive planning. Since it didn't pass, a number of us, we know each other from cities. I used to serve at a city. I served at the city of Bellevue. And there's a number of cities that have now committed publicly that they will voluntarily do what they would have been required to do had is it 1090 or 1099? That had that bill passed. And King County is looking to do that as well. We've done a lot in our planning around climate, so I think we're going to be able to do it. And I know that there's going to be the will to do it. So the question to me there is, like, the coalition of the willing will do what we would have had to do. Can we use our influence and maybe a little peer pressure to get those who might be a little more concerned about it to do it as well, and bring more people into the fold? That is where I would love to see us go, maybe with some technical assistance, or through K4C. We have a great climate collaboration that County Executive Constantine set up, the K4C King County and Cities Climate Collaboration. So we've got ways to sort of push. It would have been great if it had passed. I still don't understand exactly what happened. It seemed like it was on a track and it just ran out of runway or something.
Yeah, I tried to do.
I signed a letter to ask the governor for a special session. Several of us did. It doesn't seem to be happening.
Thank you. Yeah, there wasn't a ton of appetite. Part-time legislators, they all kind of want to go back to their day job, or their I don't know, retirement if or whatever they're doing in their other time. Related to that, maybe I'll jump over. We're about 10 minutes left, so I want to try to get to people's questions. But I know you kind of touched on this, but one place where the county does have a lot more control is on incorporated King, and obviously you made the point that out in the rural areas, we actually want to discourage growth. preserve wilderness areas and resource lands. But there's also some very urban areas of the county that are just unincorporated, not quite as much as say Pierce or Sonoma, but we have places like Skyway and White Center. But it is sort of a delicate, and issue there because it's also some of the low-income housing and most racially diverse parts of the county. How do you feel about how the county is managing that? Or are those places likely to be annexed? And how can some of these places kind of benefit from this planning to encourage density without displacing folks?
Yeah, great question. I think that a lot of, so these areas are also, in addition to being some of the more diverse by way of income and some of the most racially diverse parts of the county, are also heavily underinvested in. All of the infrastructure and services, they don't have cities there, so they don't have city programs, and the county doesn't really fill that gap very well. And part of that, not all of it, some of it's got to do with the county's funding structure. We just aren't as richly funded for local services as a city would be. They've got more taxing options. But some of it was intentional. Some of it was, if we invest a whole bunch of money here, they won't annex to the local city. And the ultimate best place for people to be is to be annexed to their local city. Unfortunately, that strategy has turned into, it went on for too long, and now what you have is some really have-not kind of areas, places that just weren't given the investment they needed, weren't given the attention they needed, and they're vibrant communities. The people have, there's a lot of community groups and advocacy that we get from them, and it's always just really encouraging to see people come in and how much they love their communities and are willing to rally around them. I want to give a shout out to my colleague. I mean, I can't believe he's only been on the council for just over 2 years, but Gurmai Zahalai has just come in swinging for those areas. He ran on, I will do something for Skyway, and he has been delivering on those promises. We've put way more money into some of these areas. We set aside, I want to say $10 million for just a specific community budgeting process there, which is not something, we've never done anything like that before. There's we're talking about funding for a community center. When we were citing some of the early COVID sites, what do you call it, isolation and quarantine sites, and some of the early ones were going to be in those areas, and the community came out and said, we feel like we're getting dumped on like we always do. There was a little more sensitivity to that than we would ordinarily have had, and we found a way to do things in a way that was more engaged the community more and was more acceptable to them. So I'm really proud that we've got a council member that takes that I am the local government here responsibility very, very seriously, and that the rest of us have been willing to set aside, like, well, how come his district gets 10 extra $1 million? What about mine? Because we recognize that we have a special responsibility to those urban unincorporated areas that just really doesn't exist anywhere else. So I feel that we've started doing better recently. That is not to say that it's perfect or that we're all the way where we ought to be. It does not seem like these areas are annexing. I think if they were going to, they would have by now. And so we have to embrace the fact that these will be the urban centers of unincorporated King County and treat them accordingly.
Yeah, that is great to hear. And I thought I would ask about another collaboration you had with Councilmember Zahalai. You, I think just this past week, introduced a bill that would move county elections to even years, which I personally am a fan of. Talk a little bit about the thought behind that, and if you, how you think that's going.
Yeah, I love that proposal. I have to give credit where credit's due. That came to me from some advocates. In this case, it was the Northwest Progressive Institute. And a bunch of people come through my office with different proposals for ways that we should change elections. And I am very happy, and I've sponsored a number of things to make elections more accessible. I was really proud that we were first in the state to push the prepaid postage and all of that. But I'm generally kind of small c conservative. We've got really well-run elections here, and they're very accessible by standards of some other places. I don't want to break anything. So when these folks came in and said, you should change your charter and move the council and the executive and the other 2 countywide positions to even numbered years, I was like, I'm skeptical. Let me take a look at this. No, the case is totally compelling, totally compelling. hundreds of thousands of people more vote in those even numbered elections in King County than in odd numbered elections. The main arguments against are like, it'll be a really long ballot. We're talking about adding 3 positions one year and 2 positions another year in a 4-year cycle. It's not going to break the ballot. It's not going to confuse the hell out of people. The folks who have the most complaints are really in the campaign industry, and we're just going to have to adjust and figure it out. But the access that it provides, the number of people who will vote for these county elected officials who don't vote today, and there'll be different age groups. We'll get younger people voting, renters instead of just owners, which typically is what I get here in Bellevue. I don't know why we haven't done it before. And we're an outlying county. Most other counties in the state have all their positions on even year elections. So I don't see the argument. I mean, this really just looks like a no-brainer to me. I'm willing to, if anybody here's got a good reason why not, like, bring it up, because I'm not finding it.
And perhaps some folks do, but I think the Urbanist is planning to endorse it. So we're pretty big fans.
Right.
And I know we have some folks from Solutionary Rail on the call, and they put some questions in the chat. And I know they're big fans of boosting frequency at Amtrak, and also making sure the transfer environment is really great around King Street Station, since there will be a ton of light rail in that area. It's also a streetcar and bus hub. Do you have you heard anything, since you're on a lot of these different boards? Are folks working on increasing that intercity rail frequency, and kind of pairing that so we have a pretty seamless system to get around the whole region, not just the Sound Transit taxing district?
Yeah, I'm a fan of that idea too, but I was expecting to hear something. We elected Amtrak Joe president after all, but it's not something that's shown up in my world. So no, but that doesn't mean that people aren't working on it. It just hasn't risen to the level where we're talking about frequencies on the shared BNSF tracks. When that comes up, I'll hear about it. And of course, at the state level, there's a lot of interest in studying the high-speed rail between Washington and Portland and Vancouver. I think that intercity rail is a really key part of a full system. I would love to see us be more like some places in Europe and Asia that has that, capacity. So yeah, if you all hear about things taking off, please point them our way if there's anything that we can do to collaborate.
Great. And we did have a couple of questions related to SD3 planning options. If you have a couple of minutes to go over, I can pivot to those, but I totally understand if you want to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. In the chat, we did have one question about the Everett Dogleg, and if you had any thoughts about that. It does add costs, it does add additional time for riders, and I know somewhat the board members take the position of okay, you can deal with Snohomish County members, and we'll deal with King County. It doesn't always work out that way because everyone's kind of in everyone else's business. But I was curious if you had any thoughts about that Dogleg.
You mean Painfield?
Yeah, Painfield.
Yeah. Well, we did during the planning for ST3. Of course, we had a number of discussions about what to do in Snohomish County, of course, the northern part of the. And we considered, could there not be a bus loop that would connect to a straighter line that went directly to Everett? Could we have a different terminus? That didn't make a whole lot of sense. It makes sense to not go to the biggest city in the county. So yeah, at the end of the day, the Snohomish County delegation really feels that that is a big business, big economic driver that needs to have a stop, and they want to grow it into more of commercial flights. And so they think of it, as we think of SeaTac, you of course would want your light rail to stop there. So no, I mean, I think the die was pretty much cast with ST3, that's the way it's going to go. Of course, I do spend fun times with a whiteboard and some colored markers occasionally, thinking about what I could do to fill in some gaps in ST4, but that's probably for another conversation.
And another ST3 question from the registration form was related to the Coast Guard's determination around Salmon Bay, which Ray DeBicki, our reporter, was the first report on that. Beat the Seattle Times by a week, I will note. But there's basically Coast Guard is siding with a coalition of folks trying to get the super yacht industry going in that area, kind of Magnolia Fisherman's Terminal area. And that could have implications about how high the bridge is. There's still a little bit of uncertainty about that, but how does that impact how you think about the Salmon Bay crossing, and how do you look at that determination from the Coast Guard?
If we really have to go as high as they're saying, I've never been a big fan of trying to tunnel to Ballard, but that changes that equation for me because those bridges seem unrealistic if they have to be that high. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I don't even play one on TV. I'm a labor lawyer and a politician, yeah. And so I'm not, I'm not well positioned to say whether it makes sense what they're saying or whether even legally it will stick. But I stood there and looked up whatever 140 or 160 feet or whatever they're saying, and it's very difficult to imagine.
Great. Well, I think I can let you go with that. Thanks so much for joining us.
You forgot a question. It's about the mask mandate. Where are you, Board Member Balducci? I'm a disabled person. I really need to know you care about us and are going to fight for a mask mandate, please, because we do need to protect the immunized, disabled, those under 5, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to hear from you. I always like hearing from you. You're one of the biggest transit fans around. Thank you for that. So I asked the question when people ask me, I asked the question of our health professionals, whether a mask mandate is necessary, and they are saying that it isn't. I will keep on asking. I don't have authority to impose a mask mandate, but I can keep raising the question on behalf of constituents and even kind of almost not quite constituents, Joe.
Thank you. And yeah, that is a good question. I know a lot of folks are kind of hoping that it can be a summer of relief, but also like, well, we don't want to prolong this pandemic longer than we need to. So yes,
I want to
thank
give
you.
A shout out to Tim Gold. I see you. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do what you said about the Coast Guard.
Well, yeah, and that's a lot of exciting. We could ask you a million questions about ST3, but I know that some of that will be happening this summer when the board digs into receives the comments and digs into what's happening with what's advancing and whatnot. So unless you have anything else you just want to completely tip your hand about what you're thinking about the alignments, we'll leave it at that and watch carefully that process this summer.
I will just say I was right in the middle of this exact part of the process when we were planning East Link. I was a council member, and then I was the mayor, and I was a board member. So I literally was right in the middle, and it was super complex. We have to take into account engineering and design and rider experience and future proofing. Are we going to be able to do the next thing if we set this up this way? And politics and impact mitigation and all of that. And this alignment has a similar number of stations, maybe a few more, but it's just so much more complex. It's so much more complex. This is a very big, complicated project with a lot of important decisions to be made. So I have to say, I really appreciate folks who follow along closely and share informed opinions and ideas, because we're going to need them. And we're getting ready to have a workshop on the ST3 was Seattle to Ballard DEIS next week sometime. Anyway, we'll put it out. It's public out there. It's on the website when it is exactly. And I really just want to encourage everybody to follow along closely and share your thoughts with us, because don't assume that there's some secret plan that we've already got figured out. We are working this in real time, and that is going to be very helpful to hear your feedback.
Great. Yeah, we will we'll put that on social media, and we've encouraged people to give DAIS comments. So hopefully some folks that I know it's there's a million things to do, but this is a big one, and like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, and We thank you for your time tonight and for being such a a careful steward of all these different boards and your work on King County Council. So thanks everyone for joining us. And if you know anyone who missed it, you can share the video after the fact.
Is it possible to get a copy of some of the comments in the chat? I saw some good ones. I didn't have a chance to, because of talking, I didn't have a chance to read them all. And I would
Yeah,
love
I
to.
think I should be able to download those. I will. I will remind me to send those to you.
That would be great. Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Councilmember Balducci.